Once again, we'd like to turn to Psalm 27. Psalm 27, we'll read the entire psalm. The Lord is my light and my salvation. Whom shall I fear? The Lord is the strength of my life. Of whom shall I be afraid? When the wicked, even mine enemies and my foes, came upon me to eat up my flesh, they stumbled and fell. Though an host should encamp against me, my heart shall not fear. Though war should rise against me, in this will I be confident. One thing have I desired of the Lord, that will I seek after, that I may dwell in the house of the Lord all the days of my life, behold the beauty of the Lord, and inquire in his temple. For in the time of trouble he shall hide me in his pavilion, in the secret of his tabernacle shall he hide me, he shall set me upon a rock. And now shall mine head be lifted up above mine enemies round about me. Therefore will I offer in his tabernacle sacrifices of joy. I will sing, yea, I will sing praises unto the Lord. Hear, O Lord, when I cry with my voice, have mercy also upon me, and answer me. When thou saidst, seek ye my face, my heart said unto thee, thy face, Lord, will I seek. Hide not thy face far from me. Put not thy servant away in anger. Thou hast been my help. Leave me not, neither forsake me, O God of my salvation. When my father and my mother forsake me, then the Lord will take me up. Teach me thy way, O Lord, and lead me in a plain path because of mine enemies. Deliver me not over unto the will of mine enemies. For false witnesses are risen up against me, and such as breathe out cruelty. I had fainted, unless I had believed to see the goodness of the Lord in the land of the living. Wait on the Lord, be of good courage, and he shall strengthen thine heart. Wait, I say, on the Lord. Again, this is a psalm of David, one in which he looks back and sees the Lord in his life. In verse 2, he looks at the present in verses 1, 6, and 12, and this enabled him to look into the future with great confidence and assurance. So in the psalm, David is seen and he is fixed upon something greater than his circumstances, whether they be circumstances in the past, present, or future. He expresses his confidence in the Lord, regardless of what happened in the past, what happens in the present, what will happen in the future. He has this confidence in the Lord. So what we see in this psalm is adverse circumstances faced and responded to with confidence in God. I want to develop the thought around verse 3, where we hear David say, in this will I be confident. I want to speak on life, the life of courageous confidence. And this is portrayed here in this 27th Psalm. But first of all, let's just consider David's confidence. Everyone places confidence in something. Many times it's multiple things. But he expresses here, in this will I be confident. Okay, confident is a firm belief. It's trust. It's conviction. It's persuasion. It's reliance and assurance. Confident. In verse 13, he expresses his confidence in the word believed. Believed. You don't have confidence in something you do not believe in. The two go together. Confidence and belief. Belief is the acceptance of something as true. And it's what we hold unto. So this confidence is expressed through the word belief. In verse 3, he imagines a future scenario of powerful opposing forces. And he says, though a host, great numbers, should encamp, should settle and establish themselves. You don't encamp by accident. That's something you do on purpose. So we see a great host encamps against him. They settle and establish themselves against him. And though war, it's a conflict and an offensive, a campaign, should rise against me. And twice he uses that phrase there in that verse of against me. Against me. Speaking of an active and intentional opposition and hostility. And he says, when and if this happens, I will be confident. I will be confident. In verse 13, he's looking back. And he says, I had fainted unless I had believed. To faint is to pass out. It's to lose consciousness. Spiritually, it is to lose heart. It's to lose resolve. It's to lose our spiritual consciousness. It's the reverse of spiritual vigor and cheerfulness. It's to become discouraged, to lack in strength to continue on. That's what it means to faint spiritually. He said, I would have done that had I not believed. Again, another way of expressing his confidence. And he says, I would have fainted. I would have fainted, but I had confidence. I believed that I would see the goodness of the Lord. So we see this confidence is an antidote to fainting. Confidence. Now, what is the object? Confidence must have an object. What is the object of David's confidence? Well, he says in verse 3, in this, something specific, will I be confident. In this, will I be in a state of being confident. In this. So it's a state of being. He's not just talking about an occasional thing. When he says in this, he is stating the object of his confidence. The question is, what is the in this? In this will I be confident. Well, he stated in verse 1, the Lord. The Lord. Now add to that, in this will I be confident. It is also the Lord is. Add to that, in this will I be confident. It is, the Lord is my light. Add to that, in this will I be confident. The Lord is my salvation, my deliverer, my restorer. In this will I be confident. The Lord is the strength, the power, the force of my life. In this will I be confident. So these are all statements of certainty in verse 1. And I believe there's the connection in this. In these things will I be confident. 3 statements of certainty, followed by 2 questions. Whom shall I fear? And of whom shall I be afraid? Now, those 2 questions have their basis in the statements made concerning the Lord. The Lord is my light, my salvation, my strength. And He is my light, and He is my salvation, and He is my strength to a greater extent than whatever may cause fear in my life. In this will I be confident. So the object of David's confidence is the Lord. He expresses that in verse 5. He expresses it in verse 10. And he expresses it in verse 14. And you notice in verse 5, for in the time of trouble, He, the one he spoke of in verse 1, shall hide me. He shall hide me in His pavilion. In the secret of His tabernacle shall He hide me. He shall set me upon a rock. In verse 10, when my father and my mother forsake me, then the Lord will. And then in verse 14, it's again the Lord shall. He shall. So he said, this is my confidence. The Lord shall. The Lord will. This is my confidence. It's a good place to have confidence. The Lord shall. The Lord will. The Lord who is. The Lord who is my light. The Lord who is my salvation. The Lord who is my strength. He shall. He will. In this will I be confident. Regardless of the situation. The situation does not overshadow the fact that the Lord is. And that the Lord is my light and my salvation and my strength. And that He shall and He will. This is my confidence. So His confidence is in who the Lord is. But also His confidence is what the Lord will do on His behalf. On His behalf. So in these verses, the object of David's confidence is the Lord. In this will I be confident. The Lord is my light, the Lord is my salvation, the Lord is the strength of my life. And He shall, and He will. In this will I believe. In this will I trust. This will be the basis of my conviction. This will be the basis of my persuasion. This is what I will rely upon, and this is where I will draw assurance from. In this, and what the Lord is. In this will I be confident. He is saying, I will remain. I will be confident. I will remain confident. I will remain sure. I will remain certain, convinced, and absolutely persuaded that the Lord is my light, the Lord is my salvation, the Lord is my strength, and He's greater than the darkness. He's greater than the bondage. He's greater than the weakness. And He's greater than whatever else may cause apprehension in my life. In this will I be confident. He is greater than the wicked. He is greater than mine enemies, my foes that come against me. And though an host should surround me, and the war should rage against me, in this will I be confident. So the object of his confidence is God. We need to often examine, where do we place our confidence? Where do we really place our confidence? That question is usually answered by our reaction to things. We can answer it verbally, but the question truthfully is answered by our reaction to a lot of things. Where do we place our confidence? It's answered by what we focus upon. So let's look at how this confidence is manifested in his life. And how it's manifested in his life, it is also manifested in our life. First of all, it gave him his confidence in the Lord, gave him a right starting point. You got to have a right starting point. Got to. Though the psalm mentions the wicked and the enemies and the foes and a host and war and trouble and false witnesses and cruelty, that's not where it begins. It mentions those things, but it's not where it begins. The psalm begins with where he places his confidence, the Lord. That's where it begins, the Lord. So he begins with the Lord, and from there he works toward these other things: the wicked, the enemies, the foes, the hosts, the war, the trouble, the false witnesses, the cruelty. But he begins with the Lord and works toward those things. Now man, God's people, like to begin with the other things and in time work their way back to the Lord, but the problem is they never truly get back to the Lord. It's just better if that's where you start. Start with the Lord. And I believe that is where we'll start, if that's where our confidence is. So, he starts with God. He does not start with circumstances. Just try that in your life. Problem arises, start with God. Don't start with the problem. Start with God. And you'll be amazed that when you start with God, the problem really may not be a problem at all. And it certainly won't be as big of a problem as you thought it was when you start with God. This is where the Bible starts. In the beginning, God. The Bible does not begin with the seen. It begins with the unseen. How often we begin with what we see. And we need to begin with God. The Bible does not begin with the physical. It begins with God. It does not begin with the passing. It begins with the permanent. In the beginning, God. It does not begin with the temporal. It begins with the eternal. My point is confidence in God starts with God. Not ourselves. not our needs. We start with our needs. Start with God. Start with God. Start with God and not our desires. Start with God and not our happiness. You see, we often start in the wrong place. And I believe that's the result of misplaced confidence. Because confidence in God means first God. Where there is confidence in God, He will be the priority. He will be the preeminence. He will be the dominance. Start with God. Secondly, it caused him to have a concentrated and very defined focus. Notice verse 4. One thing have I desired of the Lord, that will I seek after, that one thing. And then he tells us what that one thing is. That I may dwell in the house of the Lord all the days of my life, to behold the beauty of the Lord and to inquire in His temple. We hear him say, one thing have I desired. Confidence in God caused him to be focused upon living life in God's presence. That's what it means to dwell in the house of the Lord. That's where God is. And that's where you enjoy the fellowship of God. So he says his confidence in God caused him to desire the presence of the Lord. Caused him to desire fellowship with the Lord. In other words, his confidence in God caused God to give meaning, caused God to be the meaning of his life. One thing. Life is made up of many things. But we need to narrow it down to one thing. Narrow it down to one thing. That's part of learning the skill of living. Take all the things and narrow it down to one thing. God. God. That's what confidence in God does. It helps us to take all the things and narrow it down to one thing. It causes us to take all the things and put them under the umbrella of the one thing. God. That's what confidence in the Lord will do. Thirdly, it caused him to have a defined pursuit in life. Verse 4, that the presence and fellowship of God, seeing and beholding God, will I seek after. Confidence in God is a remedy to distraction. It keeps us from being distracted with all the other things. The wicked, his enemies and foes that came upon him with the intent to destroy. The host that surrounded him, the war that would rise up against him, and whatever the trouble he would face in the future. Confidence in God will not allow you to be distracted. Because where your confidence is, that's where you focus. That's where you focus. And that's the antidote to fear. Fourthly, it caused him to pray and seek the Lord. Confidence in God will always cause you to pray. And will always cause you to seek the Lord. Now, most of God's people perhaps get around to, after they've tried several other things, praying and seeking the Lord. But what does that say? It says all those other things is where their true confidence is. And now there's nothing left, so I guess I got to go to the Lord. He's the last resort. Well, if we're truly confident in God, He's not the last resort, He's the first. The first. I mean, how long does it take us? I mean, most of us eventually get there. But how many routes do we take before we get to God? So it caused him to pray and seek the Lord. In verses 1 through 6, David is speaking of the Lord. In verse 7, there's a shift, and he begins to speak to the Lord. And that continues through verse 12. In verses 7 and 8, he's very much aware of the need of God in his life. He says, "Hear, O Lord, when I cry with my voice. Have mercy upon me and answer me." He's seeking God. That's what confidence in the Lord will do. And then he goes on, he says, "Thy face, Lord, will I seek." The question is, do we have enough confidence in God to seek His face first? First. In verse 9, he prayed for God's nearness and favor. He prayed that God would not hide Himself from him. Do we have enough confidence in God that we are fearful of being separated from Him? That was his fear in verse 9. He's pleading with God that God would not hide His face from him. He's fearful of being separated from God, being separated from his confidence. Verse 11, he prayed for God to teach him, to instruct him, to train him, to illuminate him, to guide him in thy way. Teach me thy way. Now the truth is, to be taught His way, we also are taught to unlearn our own ways, because His way is not our way. Teach me thy ways. Do we have enough confidence in God to ask God to teach us His way, to unlearn our own ways? The truth is, most of God's people have more confidence in their own ways than they do God's ways. And that says something about our intelligence, because God's ways never led me astray. My way has many times. So how smart are we? Not very. Not very. Teach me thy way. He also prayed for God to lead him in a plain or level path. Do we have enough confidence in God to seek and to follow His leadership and His guidance? I know God will not lead me astray. Not going to happen. But do we have enough confidence to trust His leadership, His guidance? Fifthly, and lastly, his confidence in God was a great enabler. He says in verse 13, looking back, he says, I had fainted. I would have fainted unless, so there was an antidote to fainting, unless I had believed to see. Unless I had believed to see the goodness of the Lord in the land of the living. So, this confidence in the Lord caused him to depend and to rely upon God. Unreserved trust in God. It says something about our nature that we are so slow to trust God. That says something about us. We are more quick to put confidence in the temporal than we are God. We're more prone to put confidence in the temporal than we are God. This is why people get beside themselves when perhaps a job is lost. I mean, they just get beside themselves. That's a statement. No one wants to lose their job. No one wants to lose their source of income. But it shouldn't cause you to fall completely apart. And if it does, that shows that your confidence is in the job. And then usually, to be spiritual, we'll throw in, well, I know God will provide. But the whole time you're falling completely to pieces. Who are you trying to convince? Yourself, me, or whoever? But your actions state otherwise. Start with God. Don't start with the loss of income or the loss of job. Don't start with the sickness. Start with God. And that's a great enabler. It'll keep you from fainting. I had fainted unless I had believed. We wouldn't fall all apart if we start with God. Lean upon God. Lean all your weight upon God. Rest upon Him. Look to Him. Flee to Him. Embrace Him. How much we lose because we eventually get around to trusting God rather than just trusting Him. All the blessings, the peace that has been lost. But he believed that he would see the goodness of God. Because he believed, he did not faint. He did not faint. Confidence in the Lord is a great enabler. It helps us to do the extraordinary. Confidence in God. In light of the greatness of the Lord, in light of David's confidence in the Lord, the psalm closes with an exhortation. Wait upon the Lord. And then that is repeated again at the end of the verse. Wait upon the Lord. I've said many times, and I believe it, that I believe this is the hardest thing for a child of God to do. Wait upon the Lord. Now I realize a lot of people have a different definition of waiting upon God than I do. But wait upon the Lord. People will say, Well, I did that and things got worse. Really? You don't mean it. What happened when God told the Israelites, be still? Things got worse. Things got worse. The Egyptians didn't stay still. They got closer. A lot of times when you wait upon God, things will get worse. Things will get worse. It's a test of faith. It takes a lot of faith to wait upon the Lord. You can't wait upon the Lord without your focus being entirely upon Him. Because if your thought just goes for a second, the Egyptians are getting closer. I've got to do something. What are you going to do? Nothing but make it worse. You think it's bad now? Take it into your own hands. And it'll get even worse. Wait upon the Lord. What that means is quiet yourself. Quiet yourself. Focus your attention upon Him. That's easier said than done. Now, if the whole world was to stop while we're waiting upon God, it wouldn't be so hard. But guess what? The whole world doesn't stop while you quiet yourself and focus your attention upon God. To wait upon the Lord is to look intently for communication from Him. Well, what if He doesn't say anything? You wait till He does. You wait till He does. Well, I don't have that long to wait. God knows how long you have to wait, more than you do. Well, I've got a deadline. Wait upon the Lord. I have to make this decision by such and such a time. No, you don't. The world told you that. You told yourself that. Wait upon the Lord. And if He says move, move. But until He does, you stay right where you are. Wait upon the Lord. That takes confidence in God. Takes a lot of confidence in the Lord. To wait upon the Lord is to have a desire toward Him. You desire His ways. Most people, it's not God's ways that they desire an escape from whatever. That's to desire the wrong thing. To wait upon the Lord means that our desire is toward Him, our delight is in Him, our dependence is upon Him. It is to make His rule or His will our rule. To make His will our rule. That's very difficult. That's easier said than done. Because the truth is, by nature, we have more confidence in our own will than we do God's will. It is to make His will the rule of our lives. So much so that we will not act without it. I've had people tell me, I waited upon God, but He never did tell me what to do, so I did such and such. You stopped waiting. You stopped waiting. And you made a mess of it. You always will. It is expressing absolute confidence in God's timing. We put ourselves under the timing of man. We do it all the time. But it's to place absolute confidence in God's timing. God's timing. And God's help. That takes a lot of confidence in God. It is submission to the fact that God knows. We say all the time, well, God knows all about it. Yeah, but do you really believe that? People say it all the time. Well, God knows all about it. God can if He wants to. Yeah, that's true. but do you really believe it? It is submission to God's authority, God's direction. This is what it means to wait upon the Lord. But waiting upon the Lord gets back to, in this will I be confident. You're not going to wait upon God if you're not confident in God. And then there's this exhortation. Wait on the Lord. Be of good courage. It takes courage to wait upon God. A courage that flows from this confidence in God. And again, the reason it takes courage is because the rest of the world doesn't stop. The enemy doesn't stop. The circumstances do not stop. So as you wait upon the Lord, you need to be of good courage. Well, how do I do that? Wait on the Lord. That's where you get the courage. Have confidence in God. That's where you get the courage. And then it says, He shall strengthen continually. He shall strengthen thine heart. You need God's strength to wait on the Lord. You need God's strengthening to wait on the Lord. But that's what confidence in God will do. It will wait upon the Lord. I have had people get so upset with me. I know it's hard to believe, but get so upset. What are you going to do about this? Nothing. What do you mean, nothing? Not until God tells me to do something. Until then, we'll just wait on the Lord. Oh, it upsets them. Upsets them greatly. Wait upon God. There's no better way. No better way. Well, we have to do something right now. Not necessarily. I tell you what you do have to do right now is wait upon the Lord. Wait for His instruction. We read in Proverbs 3:26, the Lord shall be thy confidence. Oh, may that be so. Psalm 118:8, it is better to trust in the Lord than to put confidence in man. Well, there's a news flash. You would think everyone knows that, but they don't. They sure don't. Hebrews 10:35, cast not away your confidence. Be all kinds of voices telling us to redirect our confidence. Trust in the Lord. Proverbs also says if you put your confidence in an unfaithful man, it's like a broken tooth. Cause you a lot of pain. Won't be of much use. So what is our degree? I suppose, I'm sure of it, that everyone here that knows the Lord has some confidence in God. But what we need to ask ourselves is what is our degree of confidence in the Lord? What is our degree of confidence in the Lord? To what degree is our life marked by confidence in the Lord? We need confidence. And it's important that our confidence be placed upon the right object. And the only right object for you and I is the Lord. The Lord. In this will I be confident. What is the this in our life? What is the this in our life? In this will I be confident. People will say, well, I trusted in people once before, now I don't trust any of them. Well, you shouldn't have trusted him in the first place. The Bible tells us we're to put our confidence in the Lord. Well, I trusted in people and they let me down. Really? Can you imagine? Can you imagine that happening? I trusted in people and they led me astray. You got to be kidding me. I can't hardly believe that. Well, what do you think's going to happen? The Lord will never lead you astray. Never. Never. He'll never prove himself unfaithful. It's just common sense to put your confidence in the Lord. Here's what God's people do. The Lord created the universe. He created the universe. But I'm going to trust this guy over here because he's an expert in such and such a field. Really? The Lord created the universe. He's the expert. Put your confidence in the Lord. There are a lot of self-proclaimed experts. Just because someone proclaims to be an expert doesn't make them an expert. And even if they are an expert, they're not expert enough to create the universe and to sustain it and to give you life and to sustain that life. Put your confidence in the Lord. Brother Dave, if you'd come and lead us